Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Kari's Confessions, a Nonprofit Exec Tells All. I'm Kari Anderson, your host and principal with Incite Consulting. My podcast explores the tools and strategies that help nonprofit leaders grow their impact and build resilient organizations. As always, I'm here to share some hard-earned lessons and honest truths from life inside the nonprofit world. I spent 25 plus years in the nonprofit sector in leadership roles with 7 organizations. Now, I provide coaching and consulting services to ensure that nonprofits, like yours, have the structure, systems, and practices to do your best work. Wherever I go, I continue to hear that nonprofit execs need a space to gather, to receive tools, feedback, and advice that encourages them to stay the course. It doesn't matter if you're in a village of 182 or a metropolis of millions, nonprofit work is both gratifying and lonely. I'm here to make sure that you have a chance to breathe, laugh, smirk, and get excited again about the important work that you do. So I want to start with a scene that might feel painfully familiar if you work in or around nonprofits. It's 8:47 at night. Someone's still in the office, or maybe sitting at their kitchen table with their laptop open. A donor email hasn't gone out. The board packet still needs edits. A grant deadline got moved up unexpectedly. And one staff member, usually the same one, somehow knows where everything is. The login, the spreadsheet, the board history, the donor relationship, the answer to the question nobody documented. And everybody says some version of, "Thank goodness we have her." Now, that might sound like dedication, but honestly, that's often a warning sign. Because when organizations depend on heroics instead of systems, eventually the wheels start wobbling. And I want to talk about that today. Not because nonprofits are failing, but because nonprofits are often trying to carry enormous missions with infrastructure held together by duct tape, goodwill, and caffeine. And I say that with love because I've lived it. Heck, I created some of that. So I spent more than 25 years working in nonprofits across Washington and Colorado. I served on boards in 7 states. And now through Incite, I work with organizations across the country. And here's what I've learned during that time. Most nonprofit leaders are building the plane while flying it. There's no magical nonprofit handbook someone forgot to give you. Most organizations are improvising. The good news? You don't have to have perfection. You just need systems that reduce chaos. So I want to share with you, as we start today, the biggest mindset shift. One of the most freeing things I tell nonprofit leaders is this. Nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model. And every time I say that in a workshop, I see people blink. Because somewhere along the way, a lot of organizations absorb this idea that caring deeply about the mission should somehow compensate for weak infrastructure. But passion does not replace systems. You still need revenue, planning, staffing, accountability, communications, operations. I remember working with an organization that had incredible community impact. The staff were deeply committed. The board loved the mission, but every board meeting felt chaotic. People revisited the same decisions over and over. Nobody was sure who owned what. Follow-up tasks disappeared into thin air. And the executive director finally said something that stopped the room cold. She said, "I feel like I'm carrying this organization around in my head." And honestly, that's what operational chaos feels like. An organization living inside people instead of living inside systems. So here's what chaos really looks like. Chaos in nonprofits rarely looks dramatic at first. It looks small. It looks like missed follow-ups, confusion, duplicated work. Who was supposed to do that anyway? Meetings that somehow end without decisions. Staff reinventing the wheel every month. I work with one nonprofit where every fundraising event started from scratch. Every year. Nobody had a master timeline. Nobody had a simple checklist. Vendor contacts lived in old email threads. And the event chair proudly told me, "We always pull it off somehow." And they did, but at tremendous cost. The team was exhausted every single year. That's the thing about chaos. Sometimes success hides dysfunction, because nonprofits are full of capable people who compensate from broken systems through sheer effort until they burn out or leave or both. So systems are not cold. Here's where I think nonprofits sometimes get stuck. The word systems can feel corporate, rigid, impersonal. And I hear this fear all the time. We don't want to lose our heart. But I've actually found the opposite to be true. Systems are a form of care. Think about it this way. When expectations are clear, people relax. When communication is consistent, trust increases. When meetings are organized, people feel respected. When fundraising is proactive instead of panicked, staff can breathe. Systems reduce avoidable stress. And when people aren't drowning in preventable chaos, they actually have more energy for mission and creativity. So I want to share with you 4 systems that change everything. And yes, it can change everything in your organization. So here are the 4 systems that I think matter most. Not because they solve everything overnight, but because they create stability fast. 1, decision systems. Most nonprofit problems are actually a decision problem. Who decides what? How are decisions made? What happens after decisions are made? I once sat in a board meeting where the group spent 45 minutes debating a staff scheduling issue. 45 minutes. 45 minutes. And afterwards, a board member pulled me aside and whispered, "Honestly, I don't even know what we're supposed to be governing anymore." That's incredibly common. So here's the simplest framework I use. The board governs. Staff operates. Boards focus on strategy, financial stewardship, executive oversight, mission protection. Staff focus on execution, operations, implementation, day-to-day management. And one of the healthiest phrases an organization can learn is this: who owns this decision? Because unclear authority creates endless friction. Second system, people systems. The second system is people, and this is where so many issues quietly begin, because vague expectations create emotional workplaces. I worked with a nonprofit where staff kept describing accountability as negative. But when we look closer, there actually wasn't accountability at all. There was avoidance, followed by explosions. Nobody addressed issues early. Nobody clarified expectations. So by the time conversations happened, people were already frustrated. And here's the shift. Healthy accountability should feel normal, not personal. One of the most effective conversation frameworks I teach is incredibly simple. Name the shared goal, state observable facts, share the impact, ask a clear question, agree on next steps. That structure alone can transform team dynamics, because hard conversations become so much easier when they're grounded in clarity instead of emotion. The third system, revenue systems. So let's talk fundraising, because if operations are the skeleton, revenue is the oxygen. And too many nonprofits are surviving on adrenaline fundraising. I call it miracle energy, where every campaign feels like, ooh, hopefully this works. I remember one executive director telling me, "We don't actually have a fundraising strategy. We just have very committed panic." And honestly, that line has stayed with me for years. It described, I think, half of my career with several nonprofits. So sustainable fundraising isn't magic. It's systems. It's a donor stewardship plan, relationship rhythms, annual planning, major gift pipelines, consistent communication. One organization I work with completely transformed donor retention with one very simple change. They started thanking donors within 48 hours. Hey folks, that's a best practice, by the way. Right? Personally thanking, right? Not perfectly, not with fancy automation, just genuine, timely gratitude. And donors noticed because people want relationship, not transactions. The fourth system, operations. So this is the one that people often resist until things break. Operations, the how we work infrastructure. And this doesn't have to mean expensive software or giant manuals. Sometimes it's incredibly basic. I once worked with an organization where nobody could find the latest version of anything. Board files were in Dropbox. Some were on personal desktops. Some were emailed. Some existed in 5 versions with names like Final, V2, Real Final. You know the ones. So we created shared naming conventions, one source of truth, documented processes, recurring meeting structures. Nothing revolutionary, but morale improved almost immediately because confusion is exhausting. So how to start systems, right, without overwhelming everyone. Important warning here. Organizations often decide we need systems and then accidentally create more chaos trying to fix chaos. So don't overhaul everything at once. Instead, start here. Ask your team, what slows us down the most? And what problem do we keep solving over and over and over? That's your starting point. Then build the simplest possible version of a system. Test it, adjust it, because systems are not documents, they're habits. And small wins build momentum. So why is this important? Succession and long-term health. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is this. Operational systems are not just about efficiency. They protect the mission, especially during transitions. And folks, we are all going to have a transition. I once worked with an organization where a long-term employee retired unexpectedly. And overnight, critical knowledge disappeared. Nobody knew donor histories, grant timelines, reporting processes, vendor relationships. The organization spent months recovering. That's why succession planning matters. Not because someone's leaving tomorrow, or they might be, but because healthy organizations reduce fragility. A simple question I ask leadership teams is, if this person left in 60 days, what would break? That question reveals everything. So sometimes setting up systems is overwhelming, right? And I want to just share with you that asking for outside support is not failure. This is important. Sometimes organizations need outside perspective. That's not a weakness. It's wisdom. Because when you're inside the day-to-day pressure, it becomes very hard to see patterns objectively. I've watched leadership teams spend years normalizing dysfunction simply because nobody had the space to step back. And sometimes one facilitated conversation changes everything. Not because an outside consultant magically fixes the organization. Not our job. But because someone finally creates enough clarity for people to move forward together. So if your nonprofit feels messy right now, I want you to hear this clearly. Chaos is not your destiny. You can build systems that scale. You can create healthier communication. You can reduce burnout. You can make operations feel lighter instead of heavier. And you do not have to do it all at once. Start with one thing. One documented process. One clear decision rule. One meeting improvement, one accountability habit. That's how sustainable organizations are built. Not through heroics, through clarity, consistency, and care. And ultimately, that's what operational systems are really about, making it easier for good people to do good work. Thanks for joining me today for Kari's Confessions, a Nonprofit Exec Tells All. If you found this episode helpful, please do share it with a colleague or board member. Make sure to follow me on your favorite streaming platforms. And for additional resources and tools, follow me on LinkedIn. You can also check out my website at inciteconsultinggroup.com. Until next time, have a great week.